Welcome everyone. I would like to start by thanking three people who made this possible. Professor Dr. Stefano Baltasari, who introduced me and is hosting us. Mrs. Athina Kritikou, the chair, the founder and president of SCEP. You heard about SCEP earlier. And Mr. Spiros Kogas, who is the co-founder and CEO of Imagine Heritage, a nonprofit organization. And you will hear him talk later after me. So today I will talk about four topics, basically. I will present some ideas about the diversity in the classroom. Some of these you have heard from Athina, and the role of education. The position of the United Nations and Sustainable Development Goals and the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I will draw a distinction between inclusive education and inclusive mindset. And inclusive mindset was mentioned by Athina earlier in her talk. And then I will go to Greece, where we come from, and talk about inclusive education and inclusive mindset in Greece. And I will end with the program, the research that Athina talked about, and I will give you some more details about our findings. It's the SCEP educational program focused on the person. So we will talk about some results. So first, diversity in the classrooms and the role of education. And as you already heard, contemporary classrooms are characterized by diversity across ability, migration background, language, culture, socioeconomic status, learning profiles, and gender identities. So we have globally about 15% of people who are persons with disabilities, including learning disabilities, physical impairments, and poor mental health. Now, in addition, many classrooms include students from diverse cultural, linguistic, and migration backgrounds. Thus, diversity is not the exception in education, it's the norm. Research consistently shows that students with disabilities, migrant backgrounds, or learning difficulties are more likely to experience marginalization and lower levels of school belonging. These students face disproportionate exposure to bullying, so they're bullied more than other kids, lowered expectations, so they don't expect from them to do well in school, segregated pathways, academic underachievement, higher risk of early school leaving, and fewer opportunities for meaningful participation. What is the role of education? And I think basically this ties my talk with Athina's talk. Education is central in addressing such inequalities because schools are critical developmental contexts in which beliefs about difference, belonging, and justice are constructed, negotiated, and potentially transformed. What education does is it shapes future citizens. And it does not only prepare students for employment, it does that too, but not only. Schools prepare them for democratic participation. So addressing such inequalities contributes to social cohesion, reduced discrimination, greater civic responsibility, and thus education is not just about inclusion within classrooms, but it's about the kind of society we want to actually build. Well, what is the position of the United Nations on this topic? The United Nations has set specific goals to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all people worldwide. These goals concern all people, regardless of disability, race, religion, or other characteristic. They address major challenges facing humanity, such as poverty, inequalities, climate change, peace and justice, and they are to be achieved by 2030. European countries have committed to implementing strategies that support the achievement of these goals in line with the principle that no one is left behind. Now, according to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, societies must ensure respect for the dignity and individual freedom of persons with disabilities, provide them with equal opportunities, and ensure their full and effective participation in all areas of life, and finally, ensure their integration in society. Distinction now between inclusive education and inclusive mindset. This is an important distinction. Inclusive education is defined as an ongoing process aimed at offering quality education for all while respecting diversity and the different needs and abilities, characteristics, and learning expectations of the students and communities, eliminating all forms of discrimination. So the question that inclusive education addresses is who is allowed to be part of the learning community. On the other hand, inclusive mindset refers to the belief that all children, including students with special education needs, have equal value, potential, and the right to participate fully in education. And this means seeing ability differences as part of normal human diversity, not as deficits. We are unique, we are not different, as Athena said. We are all different from each other. Uniqueness is the point. It also means approaching students with empathy, respect, and high but realistic expectations. Recognizing that barriers often lie in the environment and not in the child. Being willing to adapt teaching, attitudes, and interactions to support participation and learning, and fostering a sense of belonging, dignity, and competence for every student. So an inclusive mindset shapes how educators and classmates think, feel, and act towards students with SEN every day in every classroom interaction. Now, if you look at the two terms, inclusive education and inclusive mindset, inclusive education focuses on policies, structures, and practices. So, for example, are there supports? Are there accommodation services in the school system for students, for SEN students? On the other hand, inclusive mindset focuses on beliefs, values, and dispositions that make inclusion meaningful and sustainable. So inclusive education is what we do. Inclusive mindset is how and why we do it. So true inclusion basically depends on both. Inclusive education answers what schools do. Inclusive mindset answers how people think and act. True inclusion emerges when these two align. So, for example, a school may place a child with special needs in a mainstream classroom, and that's inclusive education, right? You have accommodated the needs of this child. But whether that child is invited into group work, listened to, and expected to succeed depends on the inclusive mindset of teachers and peers. What about Greece now? Despite a strong legal framework, which was voted in before 2010 sometime, aligned with international conventions, there still exist important barriers to inclusion in Greece. First of all, we have attitudinal barriers concerning inclusive mindset. And we have low expectations, and they continue to affect the participation of persons with disabilities. And that's what Athena was talking about. But we also have gaps of accessibility, infrastructure, and resources that limit equal participation in education and public life, and that concerns inclusive education. Implementation of inclusive policies remains uneven across schools and regions. We're coming now to the last point, which is the study conducted on behalf of SCEP. I'm the scientific advisor of SCEP, and we were asked by Athena, together with two more people, Konstantinos and Thalia, to actually conduct this study. Now, you have heard a lot about the educational program. I want to put it in my own words and my way of thinking. The educational program of SCEP, through structured open dialogue, information sharing, and awareness raising activities led by facilitators with disabilities, creates the opportunities for meaningful contact between students in general education and individuals with disabilities. So the central aim of the program is to familiarize students with the lived experience of disability and to deepen their understanding of everyday structural and social barriers and highlight the competencies, resilience, and contributions of people with disabilities. It aligns with inclusive mindset approaches by encouraging students to move beyond deficit-based views of disability and to recognize diversity as a source of strength. The aim of the study was to explore students' thoughts and feelings related to their participation in the SCEP educational program Focus on the Person. A speaker with a disability described their everyday life to the students, addressing issues of accessibility, the barriers they face, and their personal strengths and competencies. Upon completion of the talk, students were asked to respond to two open-ended questions. What impressed you and how did you feel? Responses were collected anonymously, and the only demographic information requested was students' gender. The intervention the intervention during which we collected data took place between 2017 and 2018. It was carried out in the school setting. It lasted 1 or 2 school hours, basically. And for each session, about not more than 50 students participated. It was conducted, both the intervention and the study were conducted with the approval of the Greek Ministry of Education. The program was implemented in primary and secondary schools in the wider Athens area. A total of 14 schools participated, 7 primary and 7 secondary schools. The sample consisted of 340 students, 173 primary school students, and 167 secondary school students. And of these, about half were boys, half were girls. Now, students' responses were grouped into themes based on their content. An operational definition was provided for each theme, and examples drawn from students' responses were used to illustrate the operational definition. Students' responses were coded according to these themes by 2 independent coders, and we also tested for reliability of the codings. So I will present today the themes, first the themes that emerged from the analysis, and second, the frequency with which each theme was mentioned by students. So the first theme that was important, and you will see the numbers later, was the focus on the psychological resilience of the speaker. So we define that as the positive way in which the speaker manages his disability at both a psychological and physical level. And examples were in the students' answers, right? That Mr. Panagiotis was his name, lives on his own and does so many things without any help. That's what impressed this student. Mr. Panagiotis, said another, overcomes all the problems caused by his disability. Mr. Panagiotis can do everything and nothing holds him back. The second point that came out, or the second theme, was the speaker's character, which is not exactly resilience. You will see the examples. The emphasis here is on the characteristics of his personality without making reference to his disability. So, for example, a kid wrote, I was impressed by Panagiotis' spontaneity, honesty, and sense of humor. I felt good every time he spoke because I liked his character. He seems like a good person and I liked him a lot. And then another said, I was impressed by how comfortable and happy he was, even though he didn't know us and didn't know how we would treat him. Another theme was the speaker's open attitude towards his disability. So we define that as the speaker's ease in talking to students from a personal perspective about his disability. For example, one student wrote, what impressed me was the fact that he had the courage to appear with his wheelchair and talk to us about his disability. Then another kid wrote, I was impressed by how easily he talked about the issue that changed his life. And a third wrote, the fact that he was very open to talk about the topic, that he had no that he had no problem talking to us about the difficulties he faces and that he was willing to answer all our questions. Then what impressed some, especially secondary school students, was the role of society in relation to disability. So we define that as a critical stance towards society due to the lack of infrastructure for people with disabilities and the negative attitudes of individuals without disabilities. So, for example, one young person wrote, I felt awful when once again I realized how bad the situation is in our country for a person with a disability. And they gave examples of sidewalks, roads, etc. And another wrote, the fact that he could move around easily and that the problems he encountered were mainly due to the lack of organization and infrastructure and not because of his incapacity or his disability. Then what we found in the answers is an awareness through social comparison. And we define that as awareness of the reality of disability through comparing the speaker to other people with disabilities with people who do not have disabilities. So, for example, one young person wrote, I was impressed that a person with a disability can, even with difficulty, adapt to the everyday routines that we all have. I was very impressed, wrote another, by the fact that the life of a person with a disability does not differ greatly from the lives of other people. And a third one wrote, I was impressed that Mr. Panagiotis does not consider himself different from others. And finally, I was impressed that you were not different from us. We also found in a lot of the answers the empathy of students, an expressed empathy, and we define that as the emotional identification of individuals without disabilities with people with disabilities by putting themselves in their place. So, for example, one wrote, I tried to put myself in the place of people with disabilities, but it was very difficult for me. From one day to the next, wrote another, the whole daily routine changes mine, my family's, and my friends. However, a number of students wrote about the role of the SCEP program in how they felt and what impressed them. So they said, learning about or becoming aware of situations, thoughts, mindsets, and theories related to disability. This is what the definition was of what I'm going to give examples of. Today, one wrote, I learned things about physical disability that I didn't know until now. It sparked my interest, and I want to look into it more at home to see what is different about these people. And another wrote, I learned many very useful things. The discussion with him was very important, and it was a life lesson. And then we also found answers reflecting attitudes toward the SCEP educational program. For example, I felt lucky to have had this experience at our school to meet and talk with a person with a disability. When they came, so the SCEP people, I felt very good that some people go to schools to talk about this topic. There were some children that were not greatly impressed. And I want to give you here some examples. Some wrote, there was nothing really that impressed me because all of this was within what is considered normal. Personally, said another, Mr. Panagiotis' visit to our school did not impress me in any particular way. And finally, another wrote, nothing impressed me because I know that we are all equal. And then there was a second question. How did you feel after or during and after the presentation of Panagiotis? So we had, we identified three topics, three themes within that general question, which reflected positive emotions. We identified optimism. For example, I felt very optimistic even though I didn't expect it. Optimism is how I feel because all problems can be overcome and cease to be problems, and perhaps they wrote they never were. Then admiration was another reaction. I felt impressed and happy because I saw a person with a disability for the first time in my life. I felt love for this person because he is the most reasonable person I have ever met. And familiarity, sense of closeness. He made me laugh and feel at ease. I felt I could be honest with him. I felt very comfortable, said another, and at ease because Mr. Panagiotis was very comfortable talking about his condition. But there were also negative emotions expressed, for example, of pity. I felt compassion for our fellow human beings. I felt sad because this is not nice. I felt a bit bad that I could move my legs while he could not. And awkwardness, discomfort. I felt strange. I had never seen a person with a disability before. I felt very uncomfortable about what had happened to him, and I felt very bad because in my mind I had imagined things differently. And of course, some did not acknowledge any feeling, particular feeling during the program. So an example is I felt normal without feeling happy or sad because I know he did not want to provoke any particular emotion in us. They stated also a change. Some students stated a change in their thinking about disability. They stated that explicitly. So the operational definition for this theme was that a stated change is a clearly expressed reconsideration or change in students' thinking regarding disability, the speaker life and the SCEP program accompanied by positive emotions. I was impressed to realize that some of the things I previously thought I knew were wrong, is one example. So now the frequency with which each theme appeared was reported by students, it's in Greek. I will go through the numbers. I will just highlight the first one, which is really reported by many students, 57.8%, which is the resilience of Mr. Panagiotis. And the other one with the positive emotions, again, 57.8%. And here you can see exactly what we found. So psychological resilience and positive emotions were reported by a vast majority of students. Learning through SCEP was 32.4%. Awareness through social comparison, 25.7%. Reconsideration, change in attitudes, etc., 25.7%. Negative emotions were mentioned by 22.6%. And then come all the other categories, all the other themes that you can see there, the slide. So together, these results reveal that the educational program of SCEP first stimulated thoughts and emotions in children regarding disability. Children expressed more positive than negative emotions about this experience and fostered awareness through social comparison that people with disabilities have needs, difficulties, and abilities just like everybody else. Second, the results revealed that the educational program of SCEP contributed to understanding the everyday barriers faced by people with disabilities, as well as recognizing their capabilities. And the emphasis was placed on the psychological resilience of the speaker. They also reveal that the SCEP program, contributed to the reconsideration and change of attitudes, perceptions, and emotions related to disability among a significant proportion of children. And it appears that an important role in this process is played by the personality of the speaker delivering the intervention. So it's very important whom one chooses to bring into the classrooms. The speaker's openness about their disability, their character, their psychological resilience. In sum, the SCEP educational program appears to contribute to familiarizing students with the reality of disability. The program seemed to contribute to the development of an inclusive mindset among students. And we believe that this intervention can serve as a catalyst for creating a school as a context of equal opportunities and inclusion within broader social community. A school that promotes empathy, dialogue, coexistence, acceptance, solidarity, and respect for each person's uniqueness. Thank you very much for your attention.